Yeah.
Hi, I'm Gordon Harris. I'm the Ipswich Town Historian, and we're here tonight for another Thursday night Lyceum. In the 19th century, lyceums were where people discussed everything, issues of the day, and so we had this place to do something like this summer, and we decided to do it. So tonight we have two guests, John and Dan from Northeastern University's CLEAR project. I'm going to let them explain just exactly what CLEAR is. So take it away.
Thanks. All right, thank you. Do you want me to use the microphone?
Yeah, because
Okay.
they're recording that way.
Okay. Then I'm going to move it a little bit this way if I can. Is that all right?
Yeah.
All right. Hello, my name is John Coley. I am a cognitive psychologist, and I teach at Northeastern University in Boston. And I'm part of the CLEAR group. And tonight we're going to talk to you a little bit about some of our work, bringing together art and environmental stewardship. I think there are some people who are actually coming to the talk. CLEAR stands for the Cognitive Laboratory of Environmental and Arts Research. And what we represent is sort of an effort to bring together scholars from different backgrounds in different fields in order to address some of the most complex problems in our world today. Because the complexity of the problem sort of demands a complex and thoughtful and cross-disciplinary solution. Hi, welcome. So just to give you a little bit of an overview of what our vision is, our goals are to use cutting-edge techniques from cognitive science to investigate people's knowledge and understanding of their local environments. And then to explore how applied visual arts can be mobilized to enhance both knowledge and understanding, but also to increase stewardship by fostering a stronger sense of connectedness to the places that we find ourselves every day, but often feel disconnected from, at least in an ecological sense. And to achieve this, as I've said, we bring together academics from diverse disciplines. Two of our core members who are not here, one is an environmental marine scientist, the other is a landscape architect. And if they were here, it would all make sense. So we bring together academics from diverse fields, members of the art community, and also the general public to collaborate in enacting innovative programs at the intersection of art and science with the goal of encouraging environmentalism. All right, here are a few inspirational quotes. I don't know if you can see this. The human spirit needs places where nature has not been rearranged by the hand of man. Several of them use the term man to mean people. I hope they're a bit dated. Economy without ecology means managing the human-nature relationship without knowing the delicate balance between humankind and the natural world. And modern man talks of a battle with nature, forgetting that if he won that battle, he would find himself on the losing side.
That's good.
So, apart from the dated use of pronouns, what do these quotes have in common?
Talking about ecology and how it benefits society to have integrated with how we integrate architecture into our towns.
Okay, so definitely talking about ecology, definitely talking about the importance of the relationship between humans and the natural world, right? What else?
Yeah, they're really saying we really don't understand how dependent we are on nature, how much we are a part of nature when we're trying to conquer the very thing that we are.
Other thoughts? So my reading of these is that all of these, although they're pro-environmentalism, they're still separating humans from the natural world. They're still drawing a sharp line between people and nature. they're kind of portraying the idea that humans exist somehow separate from the natural world. And this is an idea that we refer to as human exceptionalism. Human exceptionalism is sort of a cognitive framework that is largely culturally driven. It's largely learned, but it's kind of a way to frame a lot of different kinds of relationships and a lot of different kinds of information that you encounter. And it's the belief that humans are discontinuous from the rest of the natural world. That we're biologically and ecologically unique, that we're not subject to natural laws or processes. And of course, in some ways this is true, right? We're probably the only species here in Ipswich recording a lecture tonight. But in many ways it's not true. So one common example of human exceptionalism is looking at evolution as a road of progress leading up to people. Thinking of humans as the pinnacle of evolutionary progress. Which would look something like this. When we know in reality from biological science, from people who study DNA and biochemistry, that actually the real picture looks more like this. There's one way to visualize the tree of life, and look, there's us. We're not that special.
Whoa.
You are here. All right?
Wow.
So our idea, one of our ideas, is that to influence the way that people behave towards the environment, we have to understand how people think about it. We have to understand how information is taken in and processed in order to impact the way people behave, and also potentially in order to kind of change hearts and minds about assumptions like human exceptions. Does that make sense so far?
Yeah.
All right. Please feel free to jump in if you have any questions at any point.
How long have we been using that term, human exceptionalism? It seems like it's an excuse for what we do.
Well, it's a description, I think, of what we do. I think a word that's been used more and for a longer period of time is anthropocentrism.
Yeah.
And so in my lab, we study anthropocentric thinking and we dissect it in a number of ways. And human exceptionalism is sort of one flavor. But I figured that might be a little too arcane for tonight's presentation. So I just want to stress, here's a beautiful shot of a Cape Cod salt marsh. I want to stress that I don't study salt marshes. What I study is what people think about salt marshes. And the two questions I want to address tonight are, first of all, do people think about nature in exceptionalist ways? Do we have scientific evidence that this is the way people construe the world? And second, are there consequences of thinking this way? Are there downstream outcomes that derive from this sort of worldview? Hi, welcome. And what I want to talk about is sort of one study that Keith and I and some of our colleagues have done, where we specifically looked at how people think about urban waterways. And in particular, do people think about urban waterways in exceptionalist ways? And so what we did is we gave people a hypothetical scenario about a river that runs through a city, and we asked them a bunch of questions. That's what psychologists do. And I want to highlight a few of the questions that we asked. One was, to what extent do you think that river impacts the people of the city? So just think for a moment. To what extent do you think this river, this is the Ipswich River?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
To what extent does this impact people who live in the city? And then we asked the complementary question. To what extent do you think the behaviors of the people in the city impact the river? And what we were interested in is the degree to which the answers to those two questions were symmetrical or sort of off balance. People responded using a slider scale from 0 to 100. And what we found, I don't know if you can see that, but this is the people impacting the river bar. This is the river impacting the people bar. So one thing to notice is this is 80 out of 100. So they're both pretty high. People acknowledge that these things impact each other. The other thing to notice is that this is statistically higher. So on average, people perceive humans as having a larger impact on the river than the river impacts humans. So there's sort of this asymmetry in humans maybe not overestimating, but not thinking about how nature impacts them as much as how they might impact nature. So rather than seeing things in a balanced way, people sort of perceive humans as having a larger impact on the natural world.
Or I would challenge the
Yeah.
presumption, because I hear in your voice that you feel like the imbalance is an inaccurate or a misperception. And I think what those numbers might be suggesting is that humans have the weird capacity to ignore the river, but the river has no cognitive capacity to ignore the people. And so that's what I see in the differential between the 80 and the 90%.
Yeah, that is a really interesting take on it. I'm trying to sort of skate around saying this is wrong, because before I do that, what I would like to do is talk in more depth to my environmental scientist friends and see what they think. But what I am going to show you is that that difference predicts a lot of things. So the degree to which, so whether it's right or wrong, the degree to which people perceive that asymmetry does indeed, to spoil my next question, have downstream consequences. So we sort of took this asymmetry as evidence of beliefs about kind of an outsized effect of humans on the natural world, sort of an exceptionalist view. And what we found was, when we looked at relationships between that difference and other responses to other questions, people that were higher in exceptionalism, that had a larger discrepancy, were less willing to invest local, state, and federal dollars in cleaning up this hypothetical river. They were less willing to volunteer their time or donate money to support restoration of the river. They were less likely to say that the river was worth restoring, no matter who paid for it or did it. And they were less likely to believe that people were ecologically connected to the river. So the degree to which people saw this asymmetry was associated with a number of sort of, I don't want to say anti-environmental, but lower environmental beliefs or values. And we found this in other studies as well. So in one study, when we focused on climate change, we found that people who were higher in exceptionalism, measured in a different way, were less willing to attribute damage caused by hurricanes Florence and Michael to global climate change. So exceptionalism impacted how they interpreted real-world extreme weather events. And they were also less likely to report that they themselves engaged in pro-environmental mitigation attitudes and behaviors. Hi, welcome. In another study, we found that people who were higher in exceptionalism felt less related to nature, I guess not surprising, and also were less likely to believe that nature had intrinsic value outside of what it can do for us. So, what I want to argue in conclusion is, first of all, people do think about the natural world in exceptionalist ways. That humans are sort of disconnected from and not dependent on the natural world. And this kind of thinking has downstream consequences. It's associated with less sustainable attitudes, values, and reported behaviors. What would be interesting, and if you have any ideas, let me know, the golden egg in this kind of research is tying these kinds of ideas and beliefs and attitudes to actual behaviors. And it turns out that that's really hard to do from a scientific perspective. So that's one of our next goals, is to measure how people actually behave in the real world and tie that to their attitude. Because what they say they do, as you might imagine, can be very different from what they actually do. Not you people, of course, but other people. And I want to drive my point home: to influence how people behave toward the natural world, we think we need to understand how people think about the natural world. And it turns out that there are actually some environmental quotes that sort of embody this idea. And one is the amazing Rachel Carson, who said that man is part of nature, and his war against nature is inevitably a war against himself. So again, excusing the pronouns, this is a deeply non-exceptionalist way to think about our relationship with the natural world.
Carson was the one who wrote Silent Spring and crusaded against pesticides, right?
Absolutely right. And kind of that book changed the way the world thought about environmentalism. Well done. And then another one, this idea that understanding that people are part of nature and not apart from nature, that we're connected and dependent on the natural world around us, of course, is not a new idea. And it is, of course, not my idea. It's an idea that indigenous cultures in North America and around the world have lived by for tens of thousands of years. So a quote from Chief Seattle, from the Pacific Northwest: "Humankind has not woven the web of life. We are but one thread within it. Whatever we do to the web, we do to ourselves. All things are bound together, and all things connect." So I want to leave you with those thoughts, sort of against human exceptionalism, and a question facing us, and a question that the members of my CLEAR group wrestle with, is what do we do about this? How do we encourage people cognitively to feel more connected to the natural world around them? And this is where my dear friend Keith Ellenbogen comes in.
Thanks. That was great, John. Thanks. So I thought I would, my name's Keith Ellenbogen. I'm a professor in photography at SUNY, the Fashion Institute of Technology, and work with the CLEAR Lab. And as we address and sort of think about our relationship to the environment, one of the things that I feel as a photographer, as an underwater photographer, is how do we connect with our local animals, and how do we understand the animals that are right here? And so I thought I would share a project that we've been working on, which is in Plymouth, but the Ipswich River, which is right here, obviously, has river herring. And so I thought I would share with you their migration from an underwater perspective, and a little bit about how we connect with animals that we can't see or connect with on a day-to-day basis. So the first thing to think about is when we look at the ocean, when we look at a river, it's hard to know what's really underneath there. I mean, what do we see? We see just water. And the question is, how do we connect with and then relate to and feel compelled to these animals? Now on land, it's a little bit easier. You see a forest, you see wildlife, but the ocean hides in many ways as a mystery for things. To get these pictures from the air, I just thought I'd show a little selfie of myself up on in a small plane. That's me as we're flying out to sea. This is over Plymouth, but in many ways the parallels are the same. We've been working with the town brook in Plymouth, which is very much like the Ipswich River here. And so when we look at this in the harbor, what is our relationship to this? We really see boats, we see a coastline, but you see in between all of the little areas in here is this tiny little river. And this little river is one of the most important rivers because it is where the river herring make their migration upstream to reproduce and spawn and reproduce. And I find their life story to be just tremendous.
Would you mind pointing out where on that picture the river was?
Yeah. So you can see the river is over here, goes underneath in here, winds through under a drive here, up here, and it goes out into the ocean over this way. And so these little fish, the river herring, are remarkable. They don't start. They live in the ocean, in salt water, of all places. And each spring, they come from the ocean, up the river, change from salt to fresh water, which is like summer to winter and not having any clothes or something like that. It's quite a feat physiologically. Against a current that is extremely powerful. Swim all the way up there, spawn, reproduce, and unlike salmon, they go back downstream and live another few years. And when we look at again this river, it just seems like a river. And I think when John and I in the lab, we really think about these things, how do we begin to develop this connection? And so when I see this picture, I see, because I was there, and it's hard here because of lighting and stuff like that, but in here you could see millions of fish. So many fish that the ripples are all the fish. And that's what we see. And sometimes we can see them jumping in above in the water here. And to put this in perspective, it's just remarkable that they can swim up this against that current. I think this is going to play. And you can see how many here are moving the top of the water. And so for a short period of time, when we develop a connection to a river, we understand like what its importance is. Do we dam this river or do we not dam this river? How does access happen? What happens with urban development? What is the ecology of these animals that in their impact in a larger, broader ecosystem? And what happens if they can't spawn and reproduce? Give you a sense of what it's like in the water. That's me. It's all the special permits and permissions to be able to photograph them. And you can see even in this murky water, the fish sort of stay around me, which is, they skirt just outside. Oops. But you can see that they're in dense numbers, packed. I just thought I would give a little bit of a perspective about these fish, and I find them to be totally spectacular. They're often spoken of as silverfish, bait fish, just any kind of fish.
Like a 6 inches, 3 inches?
Yeah, they're like this, about like 8 inches long, right? They have a wonderful little golden hue to them. You can see even variation of color, stripes, right? What a remarkable animal. These come through here every year, and we're going to do a festival to show in video that broadcasts on the buildings here to give them a vantage point, to an impression of what it's like to be with these little fish at a scale so large. They're all looking at you, moving in this kind of way. All right here.
I grew up here. I don't think I've seen this in Plymouth. Never seen them here.
I think this is what in many ways we're trying to do, is connect here locally. These rivers, while they seem like just high and low tide, support tremendous wildlife. If I could tell you of all the places, I feel very fortunate. I've traveled around the world on a lot of assignments. I have my cat-like reflexes too. I think this is one of the most amazing migrations that is anywhere. In the bubbly, turbid water.
I'm sorry, isn't there also a project afoot to remove a dam
Yes.
here?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that could be key in seeing kind of a resurgence of this sort of migration.
Are y'all talking about the dam upstream?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that these habitats, those restoration of these dams, allowing a waterway for this to happen, are critically important for these animals. This is one of my favorite photographs. Is anyone here a photographer? So for the photographic community in here, photographing individual bubbles moving at very high speed and seeing the individual ones, I can't tell you how hard and long I worked on this photograph to be able to achieve each one. And then for a little bit of luck, but I don't believe in luck as much as hard work, its eye, pierced through in this moment in there. But again, all right here. And on to continue with the photography crowd in the opposite way, the sense of movement and a feeling of what it's like to be under as the bubbles sort of wisp past us. Oops. Also in there are eels. This is the American eel. I assume they're in this one. They're definitely in most of these kind of rivers. The eel story is equally as remarkable. The eels come in here. They they live for like 30 years in the lakes, rivers. Then one day, for one reason or another, they swim down the lakes. They go to the Sargasso Sea. They spawn and reproduce in deep water where no one's ever witnessed this or seen it. Somehow, all the gametes rise up to the surface, drift all the way up the coast of the northeast coast. They go into the rivers somehow against all odds in their tiny way, are able to swim from miles out, up the river, upstream, live there for 30 years. And in Maine, they're one of the most expensive things. They have to have prohibitions against catching them. They're highly valuable, and they come in the billions, really. And then they live for years. One of the most amazing animals. Unfortunately, when you look at them, they don't have the same cuteness, I think, as some of this, which I don't know if that counts for animals, but they are a remarkable story, again, here in our local waters. This is what they look like when they're in the juvenile phases. Clear? I also just wanted to touch on two other species of animals that are here, not in Ipswich necessarily, but are in Massachusetts, that are at the intersection of how do we connect with our wildlife. How do we understand our role in what we actually are doing in here? And these are just open questions, but from a photographic point of view, they're to evoke these discussions. And then I feel very fortunate in the lab to be able to work collaboratively here and interdisciplinary to sort of begin to address this and to understand so that we can really make real world differences. But the North Atlantic right whale is one of the it's the world's most endangered whale. It's one of the world's most endangered animals. There are only about, does anyone know? Yeah, there are only about 350 of them left in the world. They migrate off our coast, off of Plymouth, really. They go up into the Maine. They feed mostly on copepods and stuff like that. And you can see Plymouth in the background as it exhales. And here you can see they just are feeding on the surface constantly, and they swim very slow. And unfortunately for these animals, they are not well suited for human interactions and human society. They swim very slowly. They're on the surface. They're in shipping lanes all the time. They're adversely affected by lobster fishing lines, kind of thing. They entangle in those things and drown. And the questions are, there are many industries. Do we slow down boats? Do we remove the lobster lines? What about their industries? How should they make money? How do we sort of deal as a society? Do we willing to pay or stop paying for lobster for a short period of time? These are the questions we have to address, but in many ways, the thing that I hope the photographs come to, and the thing that back to the exceptionalism in many ways, is how do we even know they're here to even build our connection? What is our role as people relative to understanding the natural world and their part in this? Another animal in Massachusetts that's a big controversy, but I think is totally fascinating, are the cutest of all the birds, which are piping plovers. And here we see an example of what a coastline looks like and trying to protect habitat for them. Again, the question really becomes, whose beach is this? How do we deal with these beaches? And again, the photographs are meant to engage, but as I have, again, all the permits to be able to photograph them and walk through. But again, little juvenile ones here, and they are adorable, I will say that. Here we see close-up ones with very powerful lenses. I think I put in, maybe I didn't put it in. Anyway, they hide, I don't know how to go back. Well, anyway, they hide. And the other arrow should be maybe no? Oh, well, sorry about that.
There's no going over here.
No, we've missed it. You only got the quickest glimpse, which, by the way, in wildlife photography is about what I experience on a real world kind of thing. The rest is all mental. But I think that imagery is a powerful way to connect people to these, and I hope that these photographs really make meaningful connections and establish us is when we look at our beach that we see this, our role is that there is tremendous nature right here. We often think of it in other places, but to reconnect ourselves with where nature is, and then to understand, both ourselves and nature, and to understand that one isn't different than the other in many ways. And then to just with a little shameless self-promotion for the future, which is something we did in the past in Plymouth, but a concept that we're bringing to Lyceum and to Illuminance, which is the festival in, I think, October 14th and 15th, for anyone re-listening to this later. We are going to project this large on the side of a building, and we've been doing a lot of experimentation and looking at different ways for projecting, different lighting sources, different reflective materials, and how to engage people in large-scale public art. So what we will be doing is projecting these herring very large on these buildings to give a real sense and to reconnect people to the river. We'll have the sounds there because the river is just making its natural sounds, and begin to try and and to engage people that as we walk past this, that here's the nature here. And I think we view art and visualizations as one of many tools that are powerful, and I think our lab is interdisciplinary because we all believe in the same thing, but from different perspectives are really looking to address these issues. And as part of that, we also use this as a template to do under a bridge, and just to show some of the sort of the artistic thinking and the architectural designs. If we have projections that are mapping and overlaying one another, we're aligning sort of the colors, the lines to map these so that they'll look really nice. It's not just that you take a projector and throw it on a building and call it day. Art is much more fun in things. There's a lot of always little details. Then we had a projection in there. We tried to block out the light during the day so it was visible a day. This will be an all-night event. And then as part of this, we're also trying to do surveys. And so John and his team of students is surveying to gather information of what is the impact of the imagery. Do they understand things before? What is it after that they look at? And then we try and understand this a little bit more to understand exceptionalism, understand how art influenced people. And so we're going to bring that concept over here shortly. And just to say that not only is art about, and these kind of projects, about doing real research, but also about, on a personal note, making friends and sort of the bonding that happens with students and faculty and the community through this. And this is a bunch of us that all are involved and are critical in an element of making a project like this happen. And so I think with that said, thank you very much. And if you have questions for John or I.
One more clip.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Yay.
Great. Thank you.
You got to fix the spelling though. Ipswich
That's
does not have
okay,
a T.
okay.
We can make these changes very quick in real time, so we can start the editing
happens
a
all the
little
time.
bit better. If anyone has questions,
Not from around here.
well, embarrassingly, not too far.
I got it right on the first slide, though.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's awesome. That was great.
Yeah.
Thanks. Okay. Well,
I have a question,
Okay,
sort
yeah.
of a comment, really. I'm thinking about this concept of exceptionalism, and there's this sort of movement out there called, sometimes it's called the new sincerity, sometimes it's called metamodernism. It's been sort of identified in the art world, but it also kind of talks about politics and social commentary. And you were asking sort of the hypothetical question of, when did human beings start to disassociate from the natural world, right? You showed the Native American, and I can imagine that they lived in a way that was integrated and interrelated and harmonious with the river, right? Their food, these things were provided with the river. And as we
And still do, to the extent that they're able to.
yes. And as our lives became more complex through industrialization, and we became more disassociated with individual craft, say, I think that was when things started to break down cognitively, maybe, for people, and we became disconnected. And that capacity that I suggested earlier, that modern humans might live with a river running through their town or city, but we can be so sort of mono-focused on our computer screen or our phone or our task list, or that we aren't really living in the 3 dimensions or even in context with reality because we are so, single-minded and focused on whatever it is that we're all distracted by.
I want to build on what you just said, because I've been thinking during this that we started out with human exceptionalism, where we look at the natural world and say, well, what good is it? But we now have a built environment in which we now say, and we have cars and buildings and wiring and computers, to the point that we now say, what good is that person? How does that person make our built environment? How does that person contribute to it? Sooner or later, we'll get to the point where we ourselves, divorcing us from nature, we become the lowest part of that value structure, and with our built environment becoming even more important than our own selves.
Yes.
That's important. I was actually thinking something very similar. I was wondering when you were talking, John, about whether it's really that is it really that we're disassociating from the natural world so much as we're disassociating from sort of the concept of nature, because we have this exploitative mode of thinking about the natural world. But to your point, we have an exploitative way of thinking about humanity too. I mean,
Our own selves.
right. So
That's a really interesting point. What is your name? Isaac.
Yeah. I mean, that's what depression is when you realize that you don't think you're valuable to your own world,
But I think the connection part and the conception of nature part are importantly related, but I think we sort of hang on to this idea, nature is Yosemite, right? Nature is bison in Yellowstone. It's something that you go and visit and then you come home, rather than being something that objectively you're immersed in all the time.
yeah, and I think that is absolutely happening as well, because I'm experiencing it every day with the river here being lower and lower and lower every time we look at it. And yeah, there's definitely sort of an exceptionalist mindset, because I go home and I turn on the tap and fresh water comes out.
Yeah.
So
far.
We're laundering everything through the casino. I mean, we're taking nature and giving ourselves, gambling chips, and it doesn't feel real anymore. So yeah, are we because when you ask that first question, do we affect the river? Does the river affect us? I had the same instinctive response as everyone else, like, oh yeah, we harm that river. But it's like, when the water stops going on, I'll definitely feel like the river affects me too.
Other questions or thoughts? Yeah.
Just one quick thing. It's interesting this happened. I had a woman I had as a babysitter in the late 60s and early 70s named Gail Zawacki, who just died recently, and she was considered the diva of doom. And no, look her up. Actually, it's somewhat depressive, but I'm not going to go too much into it. But look her up. I can't remember what the name of it is, but the diva of doom, Gail Zawacki, and she talks about this whole thing. And she talks about how the only way to save ourselves is to completely and utterly reorganize our thinking. She doesn't think it's possible. I frankly don't think it's possible either, but that's just my personal viewpoint. But it would be interesting for anybody who wants to look it up. Look up Gail Zawacki, Diva of Doom. Just look up what she says about all this stuff, because it has to do with everything you're talking about.
Yeah.
I will look that up. Thanks so much.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, I'm very excited to go eyes wide when you do your projection mapping. The images that you shared were very beautiful and very endearing, and I want to get a closer look, under the water. So,
Great.
thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much.
Yep. Thank you. All right. Thanks for coming tonight, and keep an eye on the Historic Ipswich website and the town calendar, events calendar for the next Lyceum event. And we'll also be seeing you guys in October, right?
Yep.
What's the date again?
October 14th and 15th.
14th to 15th.
But their big projection is going to be on Saturday the 15th. They have sort of an additional interesting thing that they're going to do on the 15th. But I also want to put out a shout out because I'm looking up and the heavens are clear. The Pleiades are shooting stars tonight. So if you're out,
All right, thank
gaze
you.
upward.
Oh, wait, where's the big projection thing going to be?
Right here.
on
at
these-
the-
on these-
at
Right
the-
by the bridge. Yeah.
the
The
bridge.
footbridge.
Thank you.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
All right. Thank you so
Okay.
much, guys.